Please, my dear, could you help me carry this? I am very tired.
Help you?
Have you completely lost your manners? You wretched old creature. Must you stand in the path of those above you?
The old woman slowly lifted her head, her expression calm, far too calm. And then a murmur began, because someone had recognized her. A gentleman stepped forward, removing his hat at once. "Do you realize whom you have just struck?" The young lady scoffed. "I see nothing before me but a duchess." Silence, heavy, unforgiving. The color drained slowly from her face, because standing before her was Lady Isolde Ravenshire, Dowager Duchess of Ravenshire, and in that single moment, everything changed. So how did it come to this? How did a young lady, raised to understand rank and respect, find herself standing in the middle of a public street, having just struck a duchess? We're about to uncover everything, but before we do, take a moment to tell me in the comments where are you watching from. And if you enjoy powerful stories of truth, betrayal, and unexpected justice like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on your notifications, because the next story might stay with you even longer. Now, let us return to where it all began. The morning mist still clung to the hedgerows as Miss Leora Bennet and Miss Seraphina Vale made their way along the narrow Surrey road. Their steps were quick, their skirts gathered slightly to keep from brushing the damp grass at the edges. The distant hum of a motor carriage could be heard somewhere beyond the trees, an unfamiliar sound that had only recently begun to disturb the quiet rhythm of the countryside. "We are already behind the hour," Miss Vale said, adjusting her gloves with visible displeasure. "If we are marked late again, I shall not take it lightly." Miss Bennet inclined her head, though her tone remained gentle. "We shall do what we can." The path curved ahead, bordered by low stone walls and thick hedges that narrowed the road to little more than a passage between fields. A faint chill lingered in the air, and the scent of damp earth rose with each step they took. They were not alone on the road, though few others passed at such an early hour. Most who traveled this way did so with purpose and rarely with pause. Miss Vale walked slightly ahead, her posture straight, her expression set. She carried herself with the assurance of someone who believed she understood her place in the world and expected others to understand theirs. Miss Bennet followed just behind, her gaze wandering more than her companions. She noticed the small things, the uneven stones beneath their feet, the birds shifting in the hedges, the distant outline of a cottage roof beyond the trees. It was she who first saw the figure ahead. An elderly woman stood at the side of the road, bent beneath a bundle of firewood that seemed far too heavy for her frail frame. Her dress was worn, her bonnet faded, and her hands trembled slightly. Miss Bennet watched her go. There was a slight ache in her chest at the ease with which she had been left behind, but it did not linger long. She stepped forward instead, moving toward the old woman. "Allow me," she said gently. She lifted the bundle with care, though the weight was immediate and far greater than she had expected. It pressed heavily against her shoulders, forcing her to steady herself before taking a step. "Thank you," the woman said. Her voice was quiet, yet there was something in it that did not match her appearance, something measured, something observant. Miss Bennet did not remark upon it. "Which way shall we go?" she asked. The woman gestured toward a narrow path that branched away from the main road, partially hidden by the hedges. "This way." Miss Bennet followed. The further they walked, the quieter it became. The sounds of the road faded behind them, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the soft shift of earth beneath their feet. The path grew uneven, winding through a stretch of land that felt removed from the order of the village. The weight of the firewood began to take its toll. Her steps slowed, her breath deepened, and the strain settled across her shoulders, yet she did not stop. Ahead, the woman moved steadily, though her pace seemed to match Miss Bennet's without effort. At one point, Miss Bennet adjusted her grip, the bundle shifting slightly. For a brief moment, she thought she saw the woman glance back, not with concern, but with quiet attention, as though she were not merely being helped, but observing. They continued on until the outline of a small cottage appeared through the trees. It stood apart from the road, worn by time and neglect, its surroundings overgrown and silent. Miss Bennet lowered the bundle at last, her arms aching from the effort. She drew a breath, steadying herself, then looked around. Something about the place held her there. Not obligation, not expectation, something quieter. The woman said nothing. She only watched. Without being asked, she bent to begin. She gathered the loose branches, clearing the entrance. She swept the worn stones with a small broom she found resting against the wall. Inside, the air was cool and faintly stale, carrying the scent of long neglect. She opened a window to allow light and air to pass through, then set about arranging what little there was, straightening a chair, folding a cloth, placing things in some small order. The old woman remained near the doorway, watching quietly. Leora found a few simple ingredients in the kitchen, a bit of flour, some dried herbs, and a small portion of preserved meat. With care, she prepared a modest meal, her movements steady despite her earlier exhaustion. The sound of the small fire, the faint warmth of cooking, and the quiet order she restored began to change the feeling of the cottage. It no longer seemed abandoned. When she finished, she stepped back slightly, her hands resting at her sides. The old woman moved forward at last. "You have done more than was asked of you," she said. Her voice was no longer weak. It carried a calm steadiness that made Leora lift her eyes. "I only did what I could," Leora replied. The woman regarded her for a moment, then reached into the folds of her garment and brought forth a small white vessel. It was simple in shape, smooth in surface, and yet unlike anything Leora had seen before. "This is for you," the woman said. Leora hesitated. "I cannot accept." "You may, and you must understand it." She placed it into Leora's hands. "If ever you are in need, you are to touch it 3 times and speak plainly what is required. It will answer you." Leora looked at the vessel, her fingers tightening slightly around it. "But you must take care," the woman continued. "Use it only when there is true need. Do not draw attention to yourself, and speak of it to no one." The weight of her words settled slowly. Leora lifted her gaze. "Why would you give this to me?" The woman's expression did not change. "Because you chose to act when you might have walked away." A silence followed. Then the woman said, "Close your eyes." Leora did so. For a brief moment there was nothing but stillness. When she opened them again, she stood within her own room. The vessel remained in her hands. She looked around quickly. The familiar walls, the narrow bed, the small window that let in the pale afternoon light. Nothing else had changed. Yet the memory of the cottage, the path, and the woman remained clear. A sharp voice broke through her thoughts. "Where have you been?" Mrs. Agnes Bennet stood in the doorway, her expression already hardened with disapproval. "You were not at the academy, and you return at this hour as though nothing is amiss." Leora stepped forward slightly. "I was delayed." "Delayed," her aunt repeated. "By what? Idleness, carelessness, or something worse?" Leora tried to explain, but her words were met with disbelief. The more she spoke, the less she was heard. Accusations followed quickly, each sharper than the last, until silence became easier than defense. That night, the house felt colder than usual. The following day at the academy, Miss Seraphina Vale did not greet her kindly. "So you chose to involve yourself," she said, her tone edged with quiet mockery. "I trust it was worth the trouble." Leora met her gaze calmly. "It was necessary." Serafina gave a small, dismissive smile. "You will learn in time that such choices bring consequences." Later that day, a young boy approached Leora quietly near the edge of the grounds. His clothes were worn, his posture uncertain. "My mother is unwell. We have no means for a physician." His name was Oliver Finch. Leora listened without interruption. "I will help you," she said at last. That evening, alone in her room, she placed the white vessel before her. For a moment, she simply looked at it, her thoughts unsettled. Then, with care, she touched it once, twice, 3 times. Her voice was low as she spoke her request. What followed left no room for doubt. She sat back slowly, her breath unsteady, her eyes fixed upon what had been given. The vessel had answered, and in that moment Leora understood that what she now carried was not only a gift, but a burden she would bear alone. In the days that followed, Miss Leora Bennet continued her quiet acts without drawing attention to herself. She moved carefully, speaking little, and keeping her use of the white vessel hidden from all eyes. When help was needed, she gave it. When there was hunger, she answered it. When illness appeared, she eased it where she could. At first, no one spoke of it openly, but small things began to change. A household that had long struggled found itself able to afford bread again. A child who had not attended lessons returned with proper clothing and books. A widow who had been near despair spoke with new steadiness. People noticed, not at once and not in full understanding, but enough for questions to begin. "How is it that she always arrives when help is needed?" one whispered. "There is something unusual about it," another replied. The murmurs grew slowly, carried from one conversation to another, until they reached ears that had already begun to doubt. Miss Serafina Vale watched closely. At the academy, her gaze lingered longer than before. Her words, once sharp but casual, became pointed. "You seem quite occupied of late," she said one afternoon, her tone measured. "Always at the right place at the right time." Leora did not answer. Serafina stepped closer. "It invites curiosity." "There is nothing to explain," Leora said quietly. "That is rarely true," Serafina replied. The following day, the tone changed. Before others, Serafina spoke more boldly. "It is remarkable," she said, allowing her voice to carry just enough, "how easily some acquire what others must labor for." The meaning was clear. Leora felt the weight of those words as others turned to look, their expressions uncertain. She did not defend herself, but silence did not stop the spread. By the time the rumors reached her home, they had grown harsher. Mrs. Agnes Bennet confronted her with greater severity than before. "Where does it come from?" her aunt demanded. "You will answer me plainly." "There is nothing improper," Leora said. "That is not what is being said," Mrs. Bennet replied sharply, "and I will not have disgrace brought into this house." The accusations came without pause, each one pressing harder than the last. Leora stood through it, her hands steady at her sides, her voice calm even as the words cut deeper. At last she understood. There would be no trust. The following day, Miss Serafina met Leora alone. "You have spoken against me," Leora said. Serafina did not deny it. "You have given reason to speak," she replied. "Do not pretend innocence where none exists." Leora held her gaze. "I have done nothing to deserve this." "That is not how it appears," Serafina said. A silence passed between them, heavier than any argument. Then Leora spoke again. "Then we shall not continue as we have." Serafina's expression did not change. "Very well," she said. And just as simply, what had once been a friendship came to its end. Days passed. Then, one evening, Serafina returned. Her manner was softened, her tone quieter than Leora had ever known it to be. "I have spoken in haste," she said. "I should not have done so." Leora listened. "I do not wish for us to remain divided," Serafina continued. "We have known each other too long." There was a gentleness in her voice that stirred something familiar. She held out a small glass. "You must allow me to make amends." Leora hesitated only briefly before accepting it. The taste was mild, almost sweet. Moments later, a strange heaviness settled over her. Her thoughts slowed, her vision softened at the edges, and her balance shifted slightly beneath her. Seraphina's voice came again, quieter now. "There is something you have not told me." Leora tried to steady herself, but the words came, not by intention, not by choice, and once spoken, they could not be taken back. The room seemed distant, her strength faded, and when she could fully gather herself again, Seraphina was gone, the white vessel with her. By morning, there was no trace of her presence. Word spread that she had left for London. There she found what she had always desired: fine clothing, elegant rooms, evenings filled with light and attention. She spent freely, moved among those who admired display, and carried herself with a confidence that grew with each passing day. But what she held was not hers to command. When she reached for it again, expecting the same result, nothing came. The vessel fell still. Then, without warning, it vanished from her hands. What followed was not comfort, not success, but something far colder, a presence she could not name, a warning she could not ignore, and for the first time, fear took hold of her. Back in Surrey, Leora stood alone in her room, the absence of the vessel clear before her. The betrayal settled slowly within her, not with anger, but with a quiet, heavy understanding. She had been deceived. She had been used. Yet even then, she did not allow herself to harden. She remained where she stood, her thoughts steadying, her breath returning to calm. What had been taken from her was not the only thing she possessed, and she would not lose herself with it.
In the weeks that followed the loss of the vessel, Miss Leora Bennet did not withdraw from the quiet work she had begun. Though she no longer held it in her possession, its absence did not change her nature. She continued to visit those in need, offering what help she could through effort rather than ease. There was no announcement, no expectation of recognition, only steady action. Then, without explanation, it returned. She found it one evening upon her small writing table, resting exactly where it had once been. There was no sign of how it had come back, no sound, no disturbance. It was simply there. Leora looked at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She did not reach for it at once. When she finally did, her hands were calm, her movements measured. She understood now that whatever power it carried was not meant to change who she was, only to reveal it. Her actions continued as before, quiet, careful, unseen, but they were no longer unnoticed. Across the surrounding villages, her name began to pass from one household to another. A kindness here, a quiet intervention there. No one spoke loudly of it, yet the pattern became clear to those who paid attention. It was this pattern that reached beyond the countryside. Prince Caelan Duval, who had come to Surrey for a brief stay, heard of it through conversation rather than report. A young woman, he was told, who gave without asking and acted without seeking acknowledgment. He listened, and then he chose to see for himself. While this quiet interest grew, another presence returned to the village, Miss Seraphina Vale. Her appearance had changed, her clothing was finer, her manner sharper, yet something beneath it all had shifted. The confidence she once carried so easily now seemed strained, as though held together by effort rather than certainty. She walked through the village streets with restless energy, her gaze unsettled, her temper quick. It was on a busy afternoon that everything came together. The street was active with movement, carriages passing slowly, tradesmen calling out their goods, and townspeople moving between shops. The air carried the scent of bread from a nearby bakery and the distant sound of hooves against stone. Serafina moved through the crowd with impatience, brushing past others without apology. Ahead of her, near the edge of the road, stood an elderly woman. She was dressed simply, her posture slightly bent, her presence unremarkable to most who passed. She shifted her position just enough to obstruct Serafina's path. "Move aside," Serafina said sharply. The woman did not respond at once. "I said move," Serafina repeated, her voice rising. There was a pause, brief but enough. Then, without restraint, she raised her hand and struck her. The sound carried, clear, sudden. Everything stopped. The movement of the street slowed, then stilled. Conversations ended mid-word. The rhythm of the place broke under the weight of what had just occurred. The woman stepped back slightly, the impact visible but contained. The bundle she had been holding slipped and fell to the ground. No one spoke. The silence deepened. The woman lifted her head. Her expression was calm, not startled, not angered, simply composed, and that calm unsettled those who watched. A murmur began at the edge of the crowd, low, uncertain. Then a man stepped forward, removing his hat at once. "Miss," he said carefully, "you would do well to reconsider your actions." Serafina turned toward him, her expression still edged with defiance. "This does not concern you," she said. The man did not retreat. "I believe it does." A second voice joined, quieter but firm. "Do you know who stands before you?" Serafina's gaze flickered, but her pride held. "I see only what is plainly there," she replied. The man's expression did not change. "Then you do not see enough." The crowd shifted, a subtle but unmistakable movement of recognition passing between them, and then the truth was spoken. "Lady Isolde Ravenshire, Dowager Duchess." The words settled heavily over the street. Serafina did not move. For a moment it seemed as though she had not understood. Then the meaning reached her. The color left her face. Her hand lowered slowly to her side. Around her, hats were removed, heads bowed, and space opened where none had been before. The woman, no longer merely a passerby, stood unchanged. She looked at Serafina with the same calm she had held from the beginning. When one believes themselves unobserved, their true nature is often revealed. Her gaze did not waver. "I have walked these roads for some time, not as I am known, but as I chose to appear." Her eyes moved briefly across the crowd, then returned. "The burden I carried was not the wood. It was the weight of character." Serafina's breath faltered. There was no defense to offer, no argument to make. What had been done could not be undone. And in that moment, before all who stood there, her standing, her confidence, and her place among them collapsed, not by force, not by accusation, but by her own hand.
The days that followed the incident in the street carried a quiet weight across the village. What had occurred could not be undone, and it did not fade into rumor as lesser events might have done. It remained clear in the minds of those who had witnessed it, spoken of in measured tones, and understood without exaggeration. Lady Isolde Ravenshire did not raise her voice nor prolong the matter. Her presence alone had been enough. The truth had revealed itself in full view, and there was no need for further display. It became known, in time, that her journey through the countryside had not been without purpose. She had moved quietly, without escort or title, observing those she encountered. The burdens she carried had not been born of necessity, but of intention. Miss Leora Bennet's name was spoken among those reflections. "She did not hesitate," the Duchess remarked in a private gathering, her tone calm and certain. "Nor did she seek acknowledgment. That alone is sufficient." Of Miss Serafina Vale, she said less. "Character," she noted simply, reveals itself most clearly when it believes itself unseen. For Serafina, the consequence was neither immediate nor loud, but it was complete. The society she had once sought to impress no longer received her. Invitations ceased, conversations quieted upon her approach. Where she had once moved with confidence, she now found herself observed with caution or avoided altogether. Her attempts to restore her standing were met with distance. There are certain moments from which recovery is not easily made, and hers had been witnessed too widely. Over time, the strain showed. Her composure faltered. Her temper, once sharp but controlled, became unsettled. Those who encountered her spoke of inconsistency, of pride struggling against something far less stable beneath it. She did not remain long in the places she once frequented. Meanwhile, Miss Leora Bennet continued as she had before. There was no change in her manner, no shift toward expectation or entitlement. She moved through her days with the same quiet steadiness, offering help where it was needed and withdrawing without seeking recognition. It was during this time that Prince Caelan Duval requested to meet her. Their first meeting was arranged without ceremony, taking place in the garden of a modest home she had recently assisted. There were no grand introductions, no display of formality beyond what was proper. He spoke to her as one person to another. "I have heard much of your actions," he said. "I have only done what was necessary," she replied. He regarded her for a moment, noting not only her words, but the absence of self-importance within them. That is rarely as simple as it sounds. Their conversation continued without strain. There was no need for pretense, no effort to impress. What passed between them was understanding built upon observation rather than assumption. He sought her company again, and she did not refuse. In time, that understanding grew into something steadier. Affection followed naturally, without urgency or display. It was not declared loudly, nor shaped by expectation. It simply formed, as such things often do, through quiet consistency. When he spoke of marriage, it was with the same clarity he had shown from the beginning. "I do not ask this lightly, nor without full regard for what you are and what you have chosen to remain." Leora listened, then she accepted. The union was marked with dignity rather than excess. Those who attended did so with genuine regard, not curiosity. It was understood that what was being joined was not merely position, but character. Within her new place, Leora did not change. The expectations of her role were met, yet they did not replace what had always guided her. She continued to offer help where it was needed, to listen where others dismissed, and to act without drawing her attention to herself. Those who served within her household found her fair. Those beyond it found her accessible. Respect followed her not because it was demanded, but because it was earned. In time, Mrs. Agnes Bennet returned. Her manner, once firm to the point of severity, had softened. There was hesitation in her step as she entered, and her voice carried a restraint that had not been present before. "I have spoken harshly in the past, more harshly than was deserved." She did not interrupt. "I was mistaken," her aunt continued, "and I have come to acknowledge it." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Leora guarded her quietly, then inclined her head. "It is understood," she said. There was no bitterness in her voice, only closure. The years moved forward with a steadiness that required no remark. What had once been uncertain had resolved itself without force, shaped instead by the choices that had been made when they mattered most. Those who spoke of her did so without exaggeration, not as someone who had sought position, but as one who had remained unchanged by it. And in that there was something lasting. She had not raised her hand in anger. She had chosen kindness instead, and in the end, that choice had changed everything.